Declare the council meeting open. Extraordinary council meeting 29 April 2019. I'll hand over to the Democracy Manager to read the apologies.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Mayor Andrew. So apologies today. We've received apologies from Deputy Mayor Martin Gallagher, Councillors Bunting, O'Leary and Taylor. They're all for absence. Councillor Mallett for early departure if the meeting goes after 4 o'clock. Are there any other apologies?
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Ryan. You look pretty lonely over there, Councillor Ryan. You can only vote once. All those for, any against, carried unanimously. Confirmation of agenda, I'll hand over to Leanne, the Democracy Manager.
In confirming the agenda this afternoon, can members please note the following. That late item 8, which is the yellow sheet that you have on your desk, is Whakatane District Council proposed LGNZ remit on road safety. We ask that this late item be accepted. It was added to the agenda this morning as a result of an email request from Whakatane District Council at the end of last week for council endorsement or otherwise of their proposed remit. It's important to include it today in order to meet LGNZ timelines. Also that there's late item C1, release of public excluded resolution report and minutes, be accepted. This item was added to the agenda late to enable a timely decision on the matter of release of this information to a member of the public. The general subject of each matter to be considered while the public is excluded under section 48(1)(a) and section 7(2)(j) of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 is to prevent disclosure or use of official information for proper gain or improper advantage. Thank you.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor James. All those for, any against, carried unanimously. Declarations of interest. Public forum, I'll hand over to the Democracy Manager, Leanne Jordan.
I believe there are no people speaking public for me, Andrew. They're all here to speak to item 5.
Okay, so we'll move now to item 5, Special Housing Area Application, Quinton Drive, Enlarged Proposal. Do you want to come up to? You. So just, Laura, I'll just get you to start by introducing yourself.
Yep. Good afternoon. I'm Laura Galt. I'm an intermediate planner in the City Planning Unit, and I'm presenting this report for the Quinton Drive SHA Enlarged Area. We propose the order.
Sorry, Laura, can you speak up a bit?
Sorry.
It's not working very well. Put the microphone down.
Is that better?
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, that's better. All right, apologies. The order of procedure that we propose is to first hear from the applicants, then move on to any submitters that are here to speak. The organisations have been given 10 minutes, individuals 5 minutes. I will then speak to the report and take any questions at that point. Before we hear from the speakers, I'd like to note the tabled items. The first one is a piece of feedback from Te Whenua Kirikiri Roa, which was brought to our attention after the report was published. Yes. Also tabled is a written oral submission from Julie Vickers, who was unable to attend this meeting today. The third table item will be spoken to by the Greater Gilbass Residents Association when they speak. So I'll hand over to the applicants now.
minutes to present, including questions. The time is on the bottom right-hand corner of the board. The clock won't start until you're ready, so just take your time preparing. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Andrew. Councillors.
I'll just get you to start by introducing who you are.
Yep.
Thanks.
My name is Lennon Gardner. I'm a Director of Quinton Residential. With me is Bevan Holbrook from CKL and Mark Maudsley from Power Architects. Just read this the statement here. Quinton Residential has applied through an expression of interest to Hamilton City Council to have a special housing area established over a 4.17 hectare site located off Quinton Drive, Hamilton Lake. Quinton Residential is a partnership between Anthem Homes, Holler Homes and Golden Homes. Firstly, we'd like to acknowledge the effort made by the council staff, which has allowed for a second tranche of SHA application ahead of the central government deadline. Thank you. The staff report is well written and detailed, particularly given the timeframes and between them the closest submissions in the meeting today. This is the second expression of interest application for the site and includes an additional 2.15 hectares of land currently occupied by Jack House Transit that has been acquired to the south of the original site. The additional land provides scale to establish a more integrated and master planned compact community. It also provides great opportunity to have a mixture of housing typologies and densities which will assist with the delivery of affordable housing. The original expression of interest was applied for in September 2017 and now after 19 months is still waiting on approval by the Minister of Housing and Urban Development. Significant council and consultant costs have been incurred over the period waiting on the decision. Quinton Residential would like council, if they believe this is a good outcome for the city, to provide a commitment to expedite the application and communicate urgency to central government for a decision. A decision from the Minister is necessary before Quinton Residential can commit to a significant investment in preparing detailed plans and technical reports to support a qualifying development application. The deadline to submit a qualifying development application is 16th September 2019. So the time frame for receiving the Minister's decision is a critical factor. Since this second expression of interest application was lodged, a concept plan for the development has been refined. Although the concept plan is still in draft form, it is subject to change once the qualifying development application phase gets underway. It does provide an indication of current thinking on layout and connections beyond the site, which we believe are in alignment with Council's plans for a compact and integrated city. Quinton Residential is actively investigating options to secure a pedestrian and cycle linkage from the proposed development site to Gilbas Ave. It is recognised that this pedestrian connection will provide residents with a more direct route to Innes Common and Lake Rotorua and generally improve the livability and walkability of the proposed development. Based on previous feedback from neighbours and residents in the area, vehicle access to Gilbas Ave is not being proposed and will not be used. There is a strong intention to purchase land to achieve the pedestrian connection. However, a final commitment is not yet viable until there is greater certainty around the Minister's decision on the original expression of interest. Mark Maudsley from Power Architects will now provide a brief overview of the latest concept for the site.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Maudsley from Power Architects. I'm a registered architect and have had 10 years experience both here in Hamilton and in Sydney. So Power Architects has been engaged to develop the master plan for the enlarged site that comprises the earlier site and also the site currently occupied by Jack House Transit. From an urban design perspective, the site is well located within the city. It is close in proximity to the Waikato Hospital to the east and a number of industrial businesses to both the south and the west. Hamilton Lake Domain is located to the north of the site and Kahikatea Drive is to the south of the site, providing for both private and public transport. There are a number of amenities in the area, including childcare, a medical centre, a mix of retail, takeaway outlets and a service station. Waikato Hospital is within walkable distance of the subject site, and those are outlined on the presentation there behind me. There is an existing pedestrian connection to the Lake Domain and the Hamilton Western Rail Trail from Gilbas Avenue. This concept design that we're prepared seeks to extend this pedestrian link through to the proposed community. This pedestrian connection is highly regarded by QRL as one way to improve the desirability of the neighbourhood. This pedestrian walkway will also provide improved connectivity and amenity for future residents. It will also link the proposed community with the existing neighbourhood and provide a through-site access. All vehicle access will be via Quinton Drive. So on the image there, the pedestrian connection runs to the top and the vehicle connection runs to the bottom. The concept master plan, which you can see there, has been developed to promote a sense of community within the neighbourhood. This includes a mix of housing types and a shared green space in the centre, as well as shared green spaces around the neighbourhood. The green spaces are overlooked by adjacent dwellings to provide passive surveillance, and the design intent is for the central green space to extend from the pedestrian connection to Gilbass Avenue and to Lake Domain beyond. Proposed housing typologies include duplex and terrace dwellings with clusters of increased density around shared public spaces. The various housing typologies will cater to the needs for a more diverse range of future residents. Importantly, this approach will provide diversity within the built form of the proposed community. Quinton Residential Limited has expressed a commitment to incorporating sustainable principles. Options currently being explored include the New Zealand Green Building Council Homestar ratings for dwellings, on-site stormwater solutions and EV charging available for both residents and public. Our core focus for the concept design of the master plan has been to create a neighbourhood that promotes community and connectivity, provides shared public spaces and connects with the surrounding amenities such as the Lake Domain and proposes diversity within the built form. The two images there at the end are just some very high-level images showing the central space on the right with the adjacent terrace dwellings, which are in an indicative form. And the image on the left shows the entranceway from Quinton Drive leading into the new neighbourhood with industrial existing to the left there and the community to the right.
Thanks, Mark. Under Clause 14 of the Special Housing Area Policy requires all proposals for SHA to demonstrate to the Council satisfaction that the development achieves the purpose of the HCC in a manner consistent with the Accord. The development places no additional financial burden on the Council and all infrastructure is available or be made available at no cost to Council. Clause 15 provides 7 criteria that the Council can evaluate to determine whether Clause 14 has been met. The Council report provides a comprehensive assessment against the criteria and concludes that there is a high level of consistency and alignment between Quinton Residential's proposal and the Council's policy. Quinton Residential is in agreement with this assessment. Quinton Residential has already signed a statement of intent, and the statement of intent is a high-level legally binding agreement with Council which covers the infrastructure requirements for the proposed development, funding for that infrastructure and a commitment to deliver at least 10% of the houses at an affordable level in accordance with Council's SHA policy. Prior to lodging a qualifying development application, Quinton Residential will enter a private development agreement with Council. The private development agreement will be a more detailed agreement which will secure infrastructure and associated funding. Quinton Residential acknowledges feedback Council has received on the enlarged proposal and the opportunity that provides to refine the development proposal. The issues raised, both positive and negative, will be further considered and addressed when necessary as part of the qualifying development application. This is only an expression of interest. Quinton Residential generally agrees with the Council staff comments in relation to the key feedback themes. In conclusion, Quinton Residential and its build partners have the resources and are motivated to quickly progress with the proposed SHA at Quinton Drive. Once the gazettal process is completed by the Minister, Quinton Residential will move quickly to a detailed design phase and get underway with preparing information and technical reports to support the qualifying development application. Quinton Residential supports the recommendations outlined in the Council's report. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thanks for your presentation. I've got some questions just about impact on existing residents and industrial stuff there. So what kind of, I've read the people opposing you and they are concerned, some of the concerns are about noise and I'm involved with another outfit over that way who's struggling with noise issues as a consequence of residential development coming into the area post the industrial being there. So obviously you'll do the best you can to try and reduce noise and from the way the place is built, I suppose. Well, sorry, not that. the issue here is reverse sensitivities, that the people you're selling your houses to need to understand that they are in an area where there may be a lot of industrial noise. I had a look around the place this morning, but no one was open at that time, so I don't know how much noise there is. But would you be prepared to do something like putting non-complaint covenants over properties, such that they know that they are going into a noisy, possibly going into a noisy area, and they accept that and won't challenge that issue?
It's probably something we can consider as part of the qualifying development agreement process with council. We work through the detail.
Okay. And just the staff report was a little confusing. You're talking about, it talks frequently about a minimum of 25 houses. I don't know if you've read the staff report. Yeah, so it talks about a minimum of 25. A lot of our staff have come back to submitters saying, don't worry, it's a minimum of 25, whereas your expression of interest, I think, talks about 111, although I counted 112 sections there. So, and it's a staged project. So can you just walk us through that?
Yeah, sure. With an SHA, the most important thing is to set a minimum yield. So when the council signs or sends it off to Wellington, they're committing to a minimum number of houses. So in our discussions with council staff, they are suggesting that there's some issues that we need to work through on this particular site, particularly around dealing with stormwater and flooding. And I've suggested that until we get the detailed reports done, that we set a lower minimum yield so that we can make sure that we are hitting that when we actually do our qualifying development application later on.
So that's 25, is it?
That's right,
Okay.
yeah.
So just in a real world, it's not bankable on 25, is it?
No, and so...
So that's not a real figure, is it?
It's not a figure we've come up with. We're confident that we'll get a solution on that site that will deliver around that 111 houses. It was the 25 as a figure that is going to down to Wellington as part of our application as a minimum number.
Okay, so just to be clear, 25 is a and I've got to be careful how I say this, but it's a fabricated number that no one's going to do a development if there's only 25 houses, eh?
No.
No. Okay, so that concerns me, because I think our staff have responded to some of the submitters saying, don't worry, it's 25 houses.
So
It won't be that bad.
So there's probably a question more for staff in this one.
Okay,
then.
okay.
So want to pick that up later with the staff? Yep. Come back to one, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so, and I know it's too early now because you've got a numerator and a denominator and you've got to divide them. But at the moment, what would be an economical yield?
Look, we've got a proposal that's gone down to, hopefully we'll go down to Wellington with the concept scheme that you see on the screen at the moment. So that's
111?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. I just note this morning this afternoon, received a notice from Thorpe, and they're saying that there hasn't been enough consultation with, particularly regarding cultural safety. But you guys did initially consult in the first proposal. Is there a lack of consultation, and or would you still look to consult with them?
I think, again, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's a question for staff as well.
We can pick that up when staff are in the seat.
Yeah, once we're talking to staff, that's a good time for that question to come up. Maybe we can rephrase Ryan's question. Whose job was it to consult with Thorpe? Was it staff's or? Yeah, thank you. So it's a question to direct at staff once staff are in the seat, Ryan.
So I guess in terms of comfort for us, you're willing to work with all the stakeholders and iwi and Thorpe and that sort of stuff?
Again, I believe that's part of the process towards a qualifying development agreement.
Cool, thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Thanks. Just following Ryan's question, because I was going to ask more or less the same one, I am puzzled by the assertion that it's staff job to do that consultation. I would have thought that a developer, knowing that this is always something that needs to be done, would have initiated some sort of contact, and I realise this is an expanded one and there has been earlier discussion, why is it staff's job to do that and not developers' job to do that sort of consultation?
Luke, could you answer that, please?
I'm not aware of if the applicants had any discussions with iwi or any other stakeholders, but it is clearly a responsibility of staff, and it's made clear in our policy of certain parties that we must engage with as part of any SHA. So we have engaged with Thorpe. We've sent them an email, like what we've did with all the other SHAs, and that was done well in advance of today's meeting. It was done not long after the council made a decision to progress this.
So just in respect of Councillor McPherson's question, the policy outlined specifically who we must engage with, our special housing area policy. So that sets the expectation on us.
I can appreciate that we must. I'm really, I guess, referring to whether developers should, that question, because I would have thought that in this day and age that it's best practice for a developer of an area like this to have done that. I don't know whether that's where Ryan was coming from, but that's certainly what I had in mind. I mean, we're the backstop, surely, to see that all the right things are done, but in the first instance, it's developers that are initiating this, and certainly in some of the other SHAs and other developments around the city, the developer has been very proactive in terms of discussions with mana whenua and iwi generally. So I'm really trying to find out if the developers have thought about doing that and have got any plans off their own bat to do that.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Dave. Probably the answer to that one is that this is still just an expression of interest document. Once we go into the qualifying development phase, once we know that we can actually do it, then we can engage more fully in the same way as we do a full stormwater assessment and a full traffic assessment and a full the full technical reports will be part of that phase. So the answer is yes, we will be engaging.
Yeah, I guess some of those are technical. This is more than technical. I'm just a bit worried that because it puts us in the position of having received a submission like this, which I don't know whether you've seen. Sorry, okay, so it'd be worth them seeing what's been said, because basically we're being asked by a particular organisation not to go ahead with it, this stage of it, and you haven't even seen this and are not yet aware that it's an issue until today, nor were we. Yeah, so I just think that that the timing is not, this is something I'm saying to staff, I guess timing is not quite right, that they ought to encourage early engagement to avoid us being asked not to proceed with it SHA for this sort of reason. Anyway, that was only one of my questions. We can't get any further with that today. I appreciate that. I'm looking at the locality plan on our page 20, which is the, it's called attachment 1. I don't know what you got, but it's got the industrial zone in yellow and the industrial amenity protection area in crosshatch red on that. Going around where the old area was, basically backing onto the existing housing. There's is that a 50-metre strip? I'm not sure it's 50 or 40 or something like that. Industrial protection zone there, amenity protection area it's called officially. And I'm wondering if the site in bold red is going to have that industrial, whether it's proposed, I know it's all determines whether it goes through, are we going to then redraw where the industrial amenity protection area is so that there's no reverse sensitivity problems later on down the line? In other words, on the south and west, is it going to be redrawn there so that we don't have immediately to the south where the other part of Jack Transit is, for instance, someone sticking up a factory right alongside these new houses?
Councillor McPherson, with the leave of the applicant, yes is the answer. So automatically, whenever you've got industrial land that changes into a different land use, that amenity protection overlay just automatically moves down to the next boundary. So,
Okay.
so in this instance, if this development was to go ahead and there was a residential development at that location that was like that or something like that, to the south of that site where you've got Jack House Traders, it's currently used for storing houses, but if someone subsequently wanted to come in and put a factory in there, a noise-emitting factory, then that would be taken into account at that particular time of that application.
And to the west, where Quentin Drive is going to go,
It's same. It's
it'll
already there.
It'll go past where the road reserve is.
It's in place there. So
That sort of goes to Gary's question about potential reverse sensitivity issues, so that we're not going to have to deal with that further down the track.
no, but I think the point that Councillor Mallett made earlier around the opportunity for the applicant to contemplate no complaints covenants, additional mitigations, more stringent noise standards, all those are on the table through the qualifying development phase, but we're not at that phase right now.
So if I can make a comment, so for clarity, this application includes the Jack House Transit site, so Jack House Transit won't operate there. So the boundary will actually be where Bunnings car park is.
Right.
So you have the Bunnings car park which runs, and then obviously the building on the front of the site there.
Okay. Yep.
The aerial image that you can see on the screen is outdated, so that's currently the Bunnings site, which shows as Jack House Transit now.
Right, okay. The last question related to that potential access, pedestrian access through to, and cycling presumably through to Gilbass. Is it proposed that you would buy a property and subdivide to achieve that, or something along those lines? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yes, correct. So when we presented on the first stage of this, there was the councillor's strong recommendation was that we provided some connectivity through there, which we agreed with, and we've been progressing discussions, has been recorded in the submissions with people to try and do that. We have got some property options there to purchase property, put through a pedestrian and a cycleway through there, trying to get that connectivity with Innes Common and Lake Rotorua.
Thanks, thank you.
Councillor Pascoe.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I've got a couple of questions. One just follows on from Councillor McPherson, and that is around the vehicle connection being limited to Kakatea Drive. And we have a number of subdivisions in the city for which we have got limited access in and out of. Given that there's potentially likely to be 250 to 300 cars within that precinct with 111 houses, do you see a significant limitation that government might also see in terms of that limited vehicle access?
Right. I mean, through the qualifying development process, we'll be able to do a full integrated traffic assessment, which will give us an answer to that.
But that will come afterwards, won't it? After you've had the approval and you're doing the detailed work with council.
So for clarity, this is an expression of interest process.
Yep.
And if this gets through government, then we can go through a normal resource consent process as would normally happen for a process.
Okay, all right. And if, given the recent SHA, which didn't get approved by central government, do you have a contingency plan in place that if this one doesn't get approved, would you go ahead with a private plan or an alternative arrangement to continue work on this development?
There's a number of options. One is a private plan, which is a very expensive process to work through. And the alternative is that it is industrial land, so building industrial manufacturing facilities and storage facilities and the likes is an option that currently has a resource consent over it to do an industrial subdivision on the site.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Just following on from that, I understand the process that goes, expression of interest, yes, we advocate to government, and then you get into the detail, the nitty-gritty through the qualifying development process, and you've mentioned, Leonard, that there's a normal resource consent process, but it's not quite a full normal resource consent process, is it? Because special housing areas are designed to cut through a lot of that, so there would be certain limits to what you would be required to consult on at that stage.
That's a question for staff, and Luke, if you could answer that, please.
Thanks, Councillor Southgate. If you make a decision to accept the staff recommendation for this to proceed and that it goes through to the Minister and then the Minister agrees and it goes through Cabinet, the applicant can lodge a qualifying development. It is, for all intents and purposes, very similar to a resource consent application. The overriding difference is that the most important matter to be considered during the assessment of that application by staff is the extent to which it fulfils the purpose of HASHA, which is to provide housing. However, underneath that are the normal, what I call the normal Standard Resource Management Act considerations for a urban development of this scale. So taking into account the provisions of district plan, the environmental effects of the proposal, all of those things still have to be taken into account. It is a different assessment from an RMA one, but those same matters are still considered during the qualifying development assessment, and council still has the opportunity to decline that application. So the decision that you make today and any subsequent decision that is made by the minister to gazette this doesn't necessarily mean it gets an automatic green light. They still have to go through a consenting process. There's an opportunity for adjoining landowners to be notified as part of that resource consent process under HASHA, and council can still decline the application. I'm not prejudging any process, in the future, but that ability for council to decline the application is one that exists. It's not a rubber stamp to simply approve the application. Otherwise, there'd be no need to lodge a QD in the first place. So all of the effects that have been identified in this report that need further investigation and testing, all of that needs to get played out through a QD. So the opportunity for people to have a say in any subsequent QD still presents itself. It's limited compared to a standard RMA one, but those opportunities still exist.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to be sure of. You did say it is limited, but the assurance I'm asking about is the public that have submitted concerns about noise, amenity, reverse sensitivity, transport, and connectivity in particular. In the qualifying development process, you'll still be working closely with the community to resolve those. They won't be shut out of that further conversation. Is that right?
No, so the applicant, as you've heard, if they get a gazettal, they'll be motivated to take advantage of that gazettal and to submit a qualifying development. As part of that, to help them in that, they may choose to consult with neighbouring landowners or mana whenua prior to the lodgement of that consent. And then when it's lodged with council, council will make a decision as to whether or not there are people that are affected. But we are bound by the legislation that it's just solely the adjoining landowners. Okay. So property that is around. So it's not the same type of notification decision that you would make under a normal Resource Management Act consent. Right. But
that's the bit I wanted to be clear about.
So people can engage in that process if council makes a decision when that's lodged that those parties should be notified of the application.
So there are some slight differences, as you're saying. But
that's correct.
But so back to the proposal. I think, Leonard, what I heard you say though is that you were open to talking with all of the people who've submitted about their concerns during the qualifying development process, that you're committed to trying to work through as many of these issues as possible before it gets to a consent. In your qualifying development process, you'll do that. Is that what you're saying?
I guess as part of this process, we've got a lot of feedback already to work with, and we've got key themes out there. I think from our very first submission to where we've got to now, we've demonstrated that we have listened to the feedback. We haven't promoted the connections Quinton Drive for vehicle access. We've totally transformed what we had proposed there. We've taken a number of those items on board and we'll continue to.
Okay, cool. And just in a broad sense, I'm not sure who the right person to ask this question is. We've had this discussion about industrial land availability and industrial land need. It was interesting, you said that at the moment there is a resource consent provision for industrial land, so effectively a factory or some other light industry use could go in there quite readily. Is that what you're saying? If housing didn't go there, then someone could invest in industrial use. That's
right. It currently has an underlining zoning of industrial. As Mr. Garden has pointed out, there's an existing resource consent for that purpose sitting there at the moment. That's a decision, that's a commercial decision I'll make subject to whatever happens today and subsequently to today. They could give effect to that existing consent for industrial land, or they could revisit it and look at a different industrial configuration.
But the point being there'd be some other effect if you were to go along the industrial land use your land for good purpose, for some good purpose, there would still be traffic and amenity and noise and things within an industrial consent, wouldn't there? So this is how do we get the best outcome for the neighbourhood. Okay, thank you. So the reason that this has come through this unusual sort of process is because, I'll make it a question, sorry, is it because the government has now put a finite date on SHAs and there's the fear that this may not get approval in time by the SHA thing that's in place?
Councillor, yes. So because the SHA legislation is not being continued after its expiry date, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development gave us notice that we would need to get all of our proposed SHAs to them, fully documented by the end of April this year.
So that's the pressure to get some support behind this if we're to go ahead with this. Okay, well, thank you for now.
Councillor Siggy.
So much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your submission. Look, we've seen a number of the plans, and I just want to come back to one thing, and I heard you're strong on the connection to Gilbas Ave, but the last thing we actually saw was connection to Ellison Street. So what made you change? Because the first one we saw was Gilbas Ave connection, so we saw a few iterations of the plan. What made you change going back to Gilbas Ave instead of Ellison Street, if I may ask?
Yep, thanks to you, Councillor Ziggy. I guess again, it was based on feedback from council and from the residents about the connection on Ellison Street being quite steep. And also the desire to have a connection, particularly from council. And that's why we've chosen to focus on a stronger connection for pedestrian and cycleways through to Gilbas Ave.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, councillors.
Right, so we'll now move into hearing from members of the public. So our next speaker is Rawiri Bidwa, who is representing Te Hao Te Whenua o Kirikiriroa. No, two, then three, then three. Thank you, Rawiri. And you have 10 minutes to speak.
Twice as long.
Mia tu ki a koe te hiamana o your worship o tēnei hui o te wānei ki roto I te whare o Kiriroa Kaunihira. Ui anō I te rangatira tai mai I roto I nā rei nā e noho ana ki te Kaunihira o Kiriroa I koutou nei nā mihi. O te rā koutou nei ki roto I te irunga I tēnei wā e noho hei I te whare nei. Kia ora anō tātou. I feel embarrassed, Mr. Chair. I know I've only got 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but I'll try and speak slowly and cautiously and concisely. And I'll tell you why. I didn't quite understand where the system was in respect of these SHAs. The previous SHAs we have worked on, Te Awa Lakes and Rotakoti North, they did their consultations with iwi prior to making any application. And when we heard that this one was being applied for, then that was when we decided to put our objection in to ensure that consultation was to be undertaken. What I'm hearing today is it appears as though this is what's happening now is a rush job per se in order to meet those deadlines put down by the Crown around the end of April. So for me, I would just like to say two things. Firstly, if that is true, then can I get commitment from the applicants that should the application with the government be successful, then would we then in turn enter into consultation? if I could get that commitment through you, Anna, that would be great. The second point that I'd like to put on the table is, yes, I know businesses are risky businesses. You have to make decisions going forward, but might I suggest to you, like the other applicants for SHAs and like the other applicants for developments, you hope that nothing comes up when we do our consultation that makes it not necessarily better for you. And if they had been done earlier, had been done before this, you might not have even applied to the government for the SHA. And that's what Ryan's talking about, this cultural safety business. If after we do the consultation, after you've got the okay and it changes your mind, then you might have wasted or spent a whole lot of effort and resourcing. I hope it isn't. And I'll leave that thought with you and for all business going forward. What might cultural safety be? You're talking there about the heritage. You're talking there about the history. You're talking there about the wairua. You're talking there about the kaitiaki of that piece of land and the importance that it has to the people of Hamilton after the developers go. We all know they're going to go. They made their money and they're gone. That we're left with it, aren't we? And so we're trying to make sure that the right things are done for the people of Hamilton for tomorrow. And all we ask of developers like yourselves and that, if you were to do this earlier, all that could have been sorted out and allowed you to carry on your way with the mitigations that would have been necessary for your particular development, if at all they were any. So, Mr. Ioana, that's my 5 minutes. I don't need any more other than to say what I've said, and whether that makes any difference to the decision that you council is going to make. I would say not now that we've heard from the developer that he's given his commitment that should he be successful with the SHA and with the Crown, then he will come back and do the consultation then. Kia ora tātou.
So, Rarui, I have concerns here as well as yourself in that afterwards under the SHA legislation, part of the legislation would mean that they only have to consult with adjoining property owners, just to be sure that the cultural safety report gets carried out in a way that you're satisfied with. Could I leave you and our Chief Executive and the developer to come together to put a clause in the resolution we're going to put up to your satisfaction to ensure that this does get addressed properly during that stage of the process?
Yes, you can, Mr. Worship.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
Okay, so I'll leave the three of you to get together. If there isn't enough time, we will have a cup of tea break to allow that to happen, unless we continue with the process and you want to do it during that time.
Do you
So,
want me to put a comment, Mr. Mayor?
yes. Yeah.
Oh, you do it on my behalf. Oh, sorry, I'm
Thank you.
publicly delegated down.
Okay. And who is the decision maker out of? Are the developers still here? Leonard.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you need to be a part of that because we also want not just a commitment from our staff, but we want a commitment from you as the developer as well to include in our resolution. Thank you very much, Rarui. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. With iwi consultation, the earlier the better, and yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker this afternoon are the Greater Gilbass Area Residents Association. Robert Herbert. Robert, are you here? Thank you. Jack Ninnis and Albert Randall, I understand, also speaking with you. If you'd just like to come forward to the table. Thank you. You'll have 10 minutes.
There is a report from them in here. Is that what they're speaking to? You've already sent in a...
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my I will just go through the report.
Yep,
I
that's
won't
cool.
read it, but I'll speak to it. I do acknowledge that we're undertaking a Hamilton City Council version of the chase here, Mr Chairman. But given that we've got 4 speakers, can we combine our allotted time? So we'd get 5 plus 2 5, it's 20 minutes?
With groups, it's capped at 10 minutes. So we've been consistent with that with the other groups that have come, but I will allow questions to overrun the 10 minutes.
Okay.
And could you, just before we start the clock, could you just each of you introduce yourselves, please?
So I'm Rob Evert, the Secretary of the Greater Gilbert Area Association, to my right.
Jack Ninnis, a private owner.
Adam Puriri, I'm the chairman of the Greater Gilbert Incorporated Society.
Albert Randall, I'm a resident and one of the committee.
Thank you.
So Rob, you're the chairman, and
Adam is the chairman, I'm the secretary.
Okay, beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's one here that says it's from the Greater Residents, Greater Gilbert Residents.
Yeah, so
There's one from Jack. Is that a separate one, is it? That's your own, Jack?
In the initial submission, correct.
Yes, okay, thank you.
I asked to be heard as part of that process.
Thank you. Just want to know.
So I'm assuming I get 10, he gets 5?
Look, just to see how it goes, but I mean, generally it's 10
I just
minutes.
want to make sure how quickly I've got
Yes,
to present.
You've got 10 minutes for the group, but we will take questions outside of that 10 minutes.
So just to clarify, our association was formed a couple of years ago just to assist both the council and the developers in what might try and inspire over the fence in the development site. And so I'll just go through what I've submitted to you and just point out that under the detailed assessment of the relevant strategic documents provided by the council in attachment 4, they do say that residential housing in the Hamilton area is going to be reasonably supplied in future. So I don't think that the council is under any pressure from a sort of capacity point of view to approve further residential developments. Clearly the developers have made their own assessment about the market and they're prepared to offer housing into it. Just a comment too that the proposal has changed since we made the first submission. They closed on April the 12th, so the submissions that you've got as part of this document here relate to that. And so they don't incorporate some of the changes that the developers made in response to feedback that we've heard, presumably from Allison Street. So the Residents Association didn't have the opportunity to submit on the extended proposal. Councillor Mallett has referred to the confusion in the document around yield and density. The terms are not actually that well defined, and sometimes 25 is referred to a minimum and sometimes it's referred to with a caveat or without any qualification. So we're a little bit confused about the intention of, I think, the City Development's comments around dwellings. But we chose to interpret it as a major reservation about some of the infrastructure arrangements made within the document, and I'll just proceed to address those now. So we put in some submissions about stormwater management, wastewater management and transportation that the City Council Development Unit also commented on, but they also made the comment that they're recommending significant reduction in yield to 25 dwellings to just emphasise the need to revisit the design of a number of these aspects. So we interpreted that as being that the City Council Development staff have got reservations about the sorts of infrastructure arrangements that the developers are putting forward and that these will need substantial revision. One thing that is missing from the document is arrangements for services, especially refuse collection that we made in our original proposal. The council is going to go to a 2 wheelie bins collection in the next few years, so that will mean that there will need to be access in the development for service vehicles and the pickup and disposal and collection of all those wheelie bins. It's one of the service arrangements that the report is silent on. With respect to Gilbass Avenue access, which has already been addressed, the developers have acknowledged that they are seeking access arrangement via the purchase of properties on Gilbass Ave. But we do point out that the original council statement on this proposal did actually say that did actually assume that pedestrian access only was from Allison Street. So this was a major departure from the original proposal that was put forward that we really didn't have an opportunity to submit on. Our position on the pedestrian access through to Gilbass Ave is really dependent on the transportation plan, which has not yet been devised or is the subject of a PDA. It may well be that if the transport arrangements within the development are not adequate, then the residents will end up parking in Gilbass Ave and walking through to the development. So the development is silent on the arrangements for car parking and whether it's going to be on-site or on the street. And so this really influences the position of our organisation on that walkway. I think you'll hear a little bit more about the social impacts from one of our other residents, but I think this is clearly a housing area and there really hasn't been given that much thought to the sort of long-term livability of the community. Now, the architect in his statement referred to that the livability is related to access to the local amenities, and he cited access through the walkway to the park and the lake. So he's really saying if you want to live in this community, you really need to get out of it. He also alluded to the access to shops and the doctors, but that's across a very busy state highway. So there's really no reference to maybe a skateboard park, a basketball court, or a bike locker for residents who may well have no storage for those things. And one suspects that the only social amenities or social activity will be to drop your kids off at the daycare, which is just in Quentin Ave, and then head to Bunnings for a coffee. So we really just say that, you know, we think that the architects and developers can do better in terms of developing communities in these sorts of developments, because they're a big departure from the Kiwi way of life. I think Albert will refer to a little bit more about the construction risk. As I know, as a resident in this area for a long time, my paths and access ways to my house are constantly moving and sinking. So I can't be confident that a major development consisting of maybe piling and other earthworks won't have an impact on the rate of sinkage that I'm experiencing on my property. So I'd be really keen to know what assurance the developers and the council can provide that I won't have further trouble. I guess the council has identified that there are a larger number of matters that require high-level private development agreements, and they're listed under attachment 6. So we're just concerned that a lot of the devil is in a lot of the detail in this. And so moving on to my conclusion now, and the last one, there are lots of development loose ends, mostly identified by the Council City Development Unit, that need to be addressed via private development agreements. And we'd be concerned that we need a private, transparent PDA framework for risk mitigation and long-term liability. So if the solutions required for some of the infrastructure works need to be robust, and there needs to be a long-term commitment to the maintaining them, and the liability needs to be assigned either to the developer or picked up consciously by Hamilton City Council. So in conclusion, we recognise the need to accommodate New Zealanders, but we'd just comment that the proposal before the council isn't the one that was actually notified to us. We think the supply of residential housing is forecast to be adequate, and that the proposal doesn't actually meet a pressing need. We are still opposed to the pedestrian cycle access. We believe in the absence of a robust transportation plan, there's a risk that Gilbass Ave may become a car park. We acknowledge the need to access the Western Rail Trail, really so people can get in and out of the city. We don't see a lot of kids playing on Hamilton Common or on Innes Common and accessing the lake area. So we think most play for children occurs locally, and the amenities need to be provided close to their houses. We believe the focus is on the development is providing houses, not homes, and that the architect could do better in terms of measures to develop the development of a community. In terms of the traffic issues, we just think they are insoluble. you've got a dense development around, surrounded by by busy roads, and you've got nothing in the development to keep people in their houses or on their properties. So if they want to go anywhere, they're going to have to get out, and I think that will exacerbate it. So it presents to us as a pretty highly stressed development. You've got a packed development surrounded by packed roads, and it strikes us as a place that actually won't be that much fun to live in. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As I said, my name is Albert Randall. My wife and I have lived in Gilbass Ave since we were the first family to live in that subdivision. We're witnesses to the continuing problems of the immediate area, as well as that of the greater area, which stretches from Ellison Street across the railway line and to Innes Common. These problems stem from soil subsidence, from flooding and drainage due to the inadequate engineering and design of the area as a whole. There appears to be little, if any, reference to the physical and emotional effects of these continuing issues on homeowners and residents. Gary Mallett, Councillor, addressed the issue of the paragraphs on pages 31, 32 and 33 about numbers. We know of people stumbling, falling out of their back door because the steps have fallen away from the house, and we could go on. I've got photos and other stuff that you could see if you wish, but I thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Would you like to say anything?
Just in caution with regards to the haste of how we're proceeding today,
yeah,
and with regards to the push to get it across the line because of the deadline being so close.
Yes.
So we just ask all councillors to take that into consideration. We've had to respond quite rapidly as a community, and we haven't been given sufficient time to do that effectively. So we just say act with caution because we're concerned, and we hope that you are.
Check.
Just one comment I've got to make is I'm really concerned that a third of the houses are getting...
Into the microphone, yep.
I guess in addition to the speakers, my main concern is that around about a third of the development is going to be 3-storied terraced houses. If you thought Poets Corner was bad, this is going to be even worse in the long term.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. It's great. We're well over time. Gary, we'll just take...
Just a real quick. It's quick.
Yeah, I promise you.
Quick for me, anyway. You talked about, Rob, I think you had a nice way of saying it, a good place to live as long as you can get out of it. Do you mean by that that they're not quarter-acre sections, and I know you don't mean quite that, but do you want more greenery around houses, or do you want playgrounds closer to the houses?
Well, I think I'd be driven by the demographics of the sort of people that buy the houses. So if you're looking to entertain young families or young children, they've obviously got the daycare centre just down the road. But once they get a bit older, sort of school-age kids, what do? Skateboard, basketball. So picnic tables and trees and grass. Well, where's the cricket pitch? And they've got to be able to break a few windows. So we're just saying that unless you encourage people to stay there, it'll just add to the transport woes of families wanting to get kids to after-school activities and things like that.
So you're looking for a local park, so to speak?
Well, I think the sorts of things that the architects need to put in place need to be some of the things I've suggested, such as skateboard parks, a small skateboard park. There's one by the off-licence down in Kakatea Drive, I just happened to notice the other day. And so I think there must be some architectural imagination that we can do for that. You know.
Okay.
You want a cycleway? They can't store bikes, so where's the covered bike locker? You know, let's get a little bit creative here if it's going to go in.
Okay, thank you.
Would you prefer that the developer connected the subdivision through as a second access through into the lake area for vehicles?
Well, if you bring the vehicles through Gilbass Ave.
No, as in second, not as only as a second, which then lets people into the amenities which are right there.
Oh, you've lost me on the thrust of your question. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Would you prefer that the developer opens this subdivision up that only is accessible by car through Quinton Drive, would you prefer that they open it up through into the lake area for vehicle access?
You mean bring vehicles through to Gilbass Ave?
Both ways, yes,
Yeah.
to give people a choice to access those amenities.
That was addressed in the first proposal that came before council some time ago.
Yes.
The problem you've got with that is the traffic ends up in pretty much the same place. So it turns right and goes to our Hopa Road, or it turns left and goes through Inniscommon to Kakatea Drive.
No, I'm
So
not talking about traffic. I'm talking about accessing the amenities, because there are a lot of amenities once you get through into the next subdivision. At the moment, you can get through by foot. With this proposal, but if you're suggesting that this is stranded from amenities and parks and places for kids to play because of the lack of vehicle access. So would you be more comfortable allowing vehicles through into the next subdivision, which would then give them access to the amenities on more than just foot?
So I'm saying that the lack of amenities within the development will drive transport out of the area. So I think the solution to that is not to provide the ability to drive off to the Gallagher Hawker Centre, which is the main other local amenity, but to give them the opportunity to have play activities in their own area. Now we're talking about kids who will mostly be part of the development there. That's the thrust of my question.
Okay. Councillor Paula.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. I do find this a little unusual process because we're feeling like I'm in a resource consent hearing right now rather than first step of a process. But my question, one of them was around what Gary asked around amenities. So that if there were to be housing in this area, what you're asking for is a higher level of amenity on site, parks, play space, whatever that might be. Second question, you talked about subsidence of land, the sinkage in peat is a peat area, we know this. The developers must know this, I'm sure. Would you be concerned if the area got developed into industry that the same amount of subsidence could affect your properties, or would it? Is there something different that I'm missing here? If a big factory or some hard space went there and any kind of earthworks, would that have the same impact on your subsidence? Is that your concern, or is it just around the numbers of dwellings?
Well, I mean, you're kind of asking me a technical question which isn't addressed in this proposal. So I'm not an engineer, but I guess it would be just the sheer number of foundations and building activity, which may not be the same as for an industrial activity. But that's above my pay grade.
That's a perception that you have at the moment. Okay, so I might, when it comes to our staff, Mayor Andrew, around some of those issues. The other question is, in terms of, you've heard what was described about the process in the previous questions, that the next, if there was an expression of interest, which will be some kind of housing arrangement on here, yet to be fully determined, this is indicative, then it goes to a qualifying development process. Would a number of these concerns around infrastructure, sinkage, some amenity and some connectivity, would they be dealt with? Are you not confident that those things could be dealt with in a qualifying development process stage?
Well, the proposal alludes to private development agreements. So my response was the need for transparency at that stage. The report doesn't actually give much weight to that particular method. For example, attachment 6 is the high-level PDA matters, which lists pretty much the concerns that the City Council Development Unit raised. So they've argued that they need to be dealt with in PDAs, not in the process you're describing. So we've responded to that.
Okay. Yes, so there's the private development agreements on one hand, and then there is the making it the qualifying development process. Those are two separate things, aren't they? So we'll get staff to clarify that a bit later for us, but what I'm trying to understand is if all of these things around traffic, amenity, noise, subsidence, which are all valid issues, can be dealt with in the development process to everyone's satisfaction, because something's going to go on this land at some time, so these things are going to have to be addressed in a way that suits everyone. potentially.
So, I mean, I guess we'd be open to dealing with them in the method you described, but what the council put in their report was the PDAs.
Okay.
So if they were going to use that other method, why didn't they say so?
So I think, Mayor Andrew, at some stage we just need to be clear when and how the wider community can have input into the project, at what stage, because I heard the developers say that they would be working further with the community. I thought I heard staff that say there was a further opportunity for community to inform the development in the qualifying development process.
So can we come to that question once we've got staff on the stand, please?
Yep, that's fine. It's just very important that we cover that off. Thank you.
Remembering this is an SHA process, not a normal plan change process.
I understand that, and that's why we need to be absolutely clear, because it's a different process. And everybody here needs to understand exactly what the process is and where their fair points of interaction are.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Right, we have two more speakers. The next speaker is Craig McGarr from Bentley & Co. And Craig, you're speaking on behalf of owners at 22 and 24 Ellison Street. 26, thank you. You've got 5 minutes.
Good. My name's Craig McGarr. I'm a planning consultant and director of the firm Bentley & Co, based in Auckland. My client owns the land on Allison Street, numbers 22, 24 and 26, being the land north of the indicated pedestrian access way from the subject site through to Allison Avenue. The original application was showing an access strip from one residential lot, previously lot 46, through to Allison Ave, and the subsequent stage 2 enlarged proposal, including the additional land to the south, includes an access lot, lot 203, and an access strip as a pedestrian connection through to Allison. Neither drawings identify the extent of any associated rights of way or use of the same, or allowances to use of the same in respect of the proposal. Subsequent to that, the stage 2 amended documentation, which was on the screen earlier, in April this year, reverts somewhat covertly to the stage 1 arrangement, where a single lot is proposed to access Allison Ave, Allison Street, via this pedestrian pathway. This is a concept plan as opposed to a proposed subdivision layout, and as you heard from the applicant, the concept plan is subject to change. In my opinion, the application docs are somewhat equivocal in terms of the future of the intended access to Allison, and that's the concern of my client. Their property at 26 Allison has some 2,000 square metres of land area and has rights of way over the neighbouring land to the south, being 26A, and the access strip servicing the SHA land from Allison. The proposal, inclusive of the stage 2 land and access way, would necessitate a change to the titling arrangements as they relate to 26 Allison, and a variation to the rights of way easements that are held. Further to that, the proposed intensification by the inclusion of the enlarged proposal. The enlarged proposal landholding has no rights of access to the right of way as it currently exists. Therefore, the pedestrian access from the enlarged proposal is not effectively on the table. So I'm concerned, my client is concerned, that going forward, noting that a qualifying development is a process quite different from a normal resource management process, resource management application, while having elements of sameness, could readily bar my client from participating in that process in the absence. Oh, that's great. Thank you. So,
just get your pointer.
Yep.
You keep doing your presentation, but we'll get you to come back to the map.
Sure.
Sorry about the time, because we need to understand it.
Unfortunately, you'll think you might have to be your...
That might be good.
My
Okay,
apologies.
so you can see the pedestrian connection in the green spine running out to Allison, where the cursor is on the screen. My client's land is immediately north at number 26.
Whereabouts, which one?
That one there.
Okay.
Okay, he also owns the two properties to the east of that, which front onto Allison directly, which is 22 and 24. That's west. No, west is to the right. East is to the left.
Okay. So your client owns this one and the next two are through?
So where the cursor is?
Yes.
Two properties to the diagonal northeast of that. Okay.
Yes.
So, but front Allison, not north of the property, but east.
Yes.
Okay. So there's two sites which front onto the street. 26 is a panhandle that fronts onto the street on the same parallel alignment. On the same parallel alignment with the access to the SHA property. Just go back to that previous screen, please. So the green land has rights of way and title. The orange land doesn't. You can see from this site, this arrangement, that this 5.5 metre access strip and the right of way provides access to the whole lot. It doesn't have legal title to do so.
Who owns the legal title to use it?
The green land has legal title because it's part of its site. These sites are not connected. The rights of way relate to the 26 and the green land interchangeably.
So the orange land
Yes.
is owned by the same owner
The prospective owner,
as the green
developer,
land?
yes.
So
Separate in title.
could they not hand,
They could amalgamate,
and give a right?
but the rights of way relate to my client's land and rights of way as well, which are not interchangeable with the orange land. There needs to be an arrangement made with my client to do so. That arrangement has not been entered into. There's been no consultation with my client. So the concern is in respect of prospective further intensification and use of the rights of way, leaving aside the fact that the land has been historically zoned industrial, and we now have multiple residential lots prospectively using the land in a pedestrian sense, if not future vehicle sense.
So don't worry about the clock.
Yep.
What you're saying is that this green land
Yes,
and your client's land
yes.
both have rights of way over the right of way?
They have reciprocal. The land, the green land is the title. My client has rights of way over it.
So you believe legally your client could block?
Further intensification of the use of that land which doesn't have title to it.
Thank you. Just to
Yep,
get
it's
an
very clear.
understanding for
Yep,
everybody. Yeah.
thank you. And plainly, the intensification of the industrial land, leaving aside the orange land, may also further interfere and restrict the use of the right of way by my client, irrespective. And that'll be a matter for legal interpretation going forward also. The lack of clarity and resolution of this matter is a fundamental component to, I think, the Council's decision-making on this matter, which hasn't been brought to your attention properly. It's not appropriate to deal with this later. It's not a design matter to be addressed later. And how this access may or may not be used and how it may or may not be integrated is an important consideration for this SHA proposition. Leaving aside the merits argument and the implications from a operational perspective, crime prevention through environmental design, safety issues with pedestrians versus vehicles that will access my client's site now and into the future if that land is intensified, being, as I say, just shy of 2,000 squares, inclusive of, or in addition to the land he also owns through to Allison Street, making up some 4,000 squares in total. So that's the issue from my client's perspective, which I say needs to be resolved to enable you to go forward. Thank you. Any questions?
Councillor Dove.
Say that all the items you're bringing up would normally be dealt with at the stage of a resource consent hearing, if that were one of those, as opposed to a qualifying project hearing?
I think the issue is the same irrespective. If they don't have rights to use the land, there's a shortcoming. It's not a resource consent or a qualifying development process matter. It's a technicality matter.
It's a technicality matter, and this is, wouldn't you say this is not the time for technicality matters? This is deliberately, under the HASHA Act, a concept plan stage.
I think it's a significant risk to move forward without rights to land.
But there is still the opportunity, is there not, to test all of your technical points, which you've used that word as well as myself,
yes,
at the stage of a qualifying development application.
Yeah, I understand that. It's, I guess, in the same vein as the prospective purchase of land through to the land to the north, not on this plan, but on the concept plan, which the Gilbass residents are concerned with, and that the applicant, as I understand, doesn't own that land either. In this instance, the issue also arises in respect of the prospective use of the access leg through to Allison in respect of vehicle circulation to and from my client's site, pedestrian use with or without that situation occurring. It is a design matter, I understand that, but I think that the council needs to be cognizant of making a decision that if it's a no-go outcome, there's a waste of time situation here.
And you've just mentioned the proposed concept plan, which shows potential access onto Gilbass Avenue.
Yes.
Doesn't that proposed concept plan show no potential access onto Ellison Street via that right-of-way?
That's correct. It reverts almost to this situation, the previous situation to this that's originally lodged, with only showing, as you note, lot 203 serving that landholding. But I note a comment from the applicant this morning that the concept plan is subject to change, and you'll note the positioning of the buildings on that particular lot are west of the boundary, leaving sufficient space to accommodate something very similar to this, and noting also that the east-west road that connects to that particular lot has a passive recreation reserve at the end of it, which would provide the similar connectivity through that land.
But in terms of subjectivity to change, isn't the final determinant of that the decision following the qualifying development hearing? Isn't that the final determinant?
An application for qualifying development will certainly put this proposal into a clearer light, correct. But of course the qualifying development process is quite different from the normal RMA process in respect of neighbouring parties. And technically my client's land is separated from the subject site by the driveway, which serves number 26A.
But looking at that diagram, your client's land directly abuts the narrow green strip. So you're suggesting you wouldn't be, your clients wouldn't have a, hang on, wait until I finish, wouldn't have a say?
My client's land does not abut the green strip. My client...
Looks like it does up there.
Yeah. 26A, which is to the west of my client's land, which is which one? Sorry, you pointed that. Which is that one where the cursor is on the screen.
Right. And your land is the next one to the east, and it abuts the strip, doesn't it?
There's a strip of land which services 26A through to Allison, which separates my client's site from the green land.
Which is your client's site?
26.
That one. Yep. And that abuts the green strip.
No. There's a strip in between.
My eyes must be deceiving me, sorry.
Yep. So the strip in between, but my client has rights of way over the strip
Looks like it there.
And the green land. Has rights of way over both. It doesn't have legal title or adjoining title.
Okay. So you're suggesting that your clients wouldn't have a say at the qualifying development stage because of that?
Well, there'll be an interpretation as to adjacency.
But adjacency to that green strip there is direct. It's not via any other...
We don't have legal title joining boundaries.
Okay, we'll ask staff to address that question, because I would have thought that the requirement was for your clients to be consulted as part of the QD.
So we can pick that up. There's a whole lot of things we need to canvass through these questions of the various submitters, but legally and technically Craig's correct, because there's a joint ownership of the strip and two different strips owned by two different individuals. However, that doesn't mean we can't require the developer to actually consult with the property owners during the QD phase anyway. So we can pick that up at a later stage and we'll answer those questions.
Yeah. So if that were the outcome, what's just been suggested, that would satisfy the consultation part of your issue?
Well, there's certainly we'd then be a party at the table as a potential submitter to an application.
Yeah. Thanks.
Can you apply for a resource consent on land that you don't own?
Yes.
So is this taking that into account, how does that make this improper?
I'm not saying it's improper, Your Worship. I'm saying that lack of consultation with my client is putting the application at risk, in the sense that there's a flaw in the proposal in relying on access through to Allison for the scale and scope and intensity of development, which you're being asked to endorse.
Councillor Robb.
Thank you, Chair. Just two quick questions. One of them might have already been answered with the the enlarged diagram. I assume that walkway is owned now by the owners of the green site and not your client.
My understanding is the applicant owns the green site that you see.
So when you enlarge that access way to Allison Street is part of the green site, is it?
It's the width of that green strip. The land to the north of that services 26A to the west.
Yep.
And the applicant has rights of way over that strip, as does my client, vice versa.
As has your client?
Yes.
So there's an easement or something, is
Correct. Rights of way easements, none of which are referred to in the application material.
Okay, so that's
in the
part
sense
of,
the
that's
plan
part of your
drawings.
concern, is that that easement needs to be considered or needs to be addressed. The rights of your clients with that easement over that strip of green land there needs to be considered as part of this application.
Correct, and prospectively needs to be altered to provide for that access arrangement, should the applicant wish to use it.
Okay, I guess that's the options that you would consider once you've been approached.
Correct.
And so your clients with 3 properties, they are all residential or are they commercial?
They're all residential.
All residential. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, there are no further questions. Could I, Councillor, sorry, Craig, could I ask you to have some direct dialogue with staff?
Yes.
Now, if that suits you.
Sure, well,
that
perhaps
suits staff.
at the breaks are here, run the submission rather than interrupting the process.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are you saying that your client has a right over that property that is of the nature of an ownership type right?
No, my client has rights of way over that green strip.
Yes, some sort of property right. Yep.
Rights of way.
Yep. Thank you.
Is it okay, Mr Mayor, if we just wait for the last submitter, just so my team can hear all the submissions before, Craig, if you've got time, just wait around till after that submission?
Sure.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Our last speaker this afternoon is Dr. John Goldsmith. And I understand you have a PowerPoint presentation as well, so staff will help get that ready. And Dr. Goldsmith, you have 5 minutes.
Mayor King and tēnā koutou, councillors and all attendees. I'm John Goldsmith, a paediatrician, just retired recently from Waikato DHB. I've been a paediatrician for 35 years. That's a specialist in child health, and I have a particular interest in child development, particularly with the recent evidence that's being sadly acquired from a number of nasty events around the world of the effects of trauma on children. Also have an interest in the needs of children and families who have children with disabilities, and the need for safety because of the large number of children we see at hospital who have accidents which are avoidable because of unsafe environments. So what I'd like to do is to move this on. No, wrong one. Good. There we go. Just to draw your attention and to the council particularly to this statement from the NPS-UDC, which is referred to in the agenda from 2016 National Policy Statement. Well-functioning urban environments provide for people and communities' well-being. They provide people with access to a choice of homes with good connections between them and attractive built and natural environments. They have good quality physical and social infrastructure and open space. And this policy statement is particularly relevant to council because it ensures that local authorities should provide enough space for their populations to happily live and work and provide for the well-being of current generations and those to come. And some of the issues raised by this proposal are very relevant to this. Another Ministry of Education has already submitted on the access to schools and the fact that local schools have relatively poor capacity for additional students, but there's no school apart from the early childhood centres I mentioned before, which are situated here, less than 30 minutes walk away, and in many cases crossing very busy roads, to Road Street School here, to Hamilton West School here, and to the Melville School block there. And the only high school apart from Melville High is the Hamilton Girls High School there. So I don't know how much capacity these schools have, but there's certainly going to be the potential for a large number of children, some of whom will have chronic health problems and disabilities, to need to attend school. This is the plan which we've been seeing. There's some parking here, and I won't talk in great deal about that, but clearly the number of parks is inadequate to cope with the needs of residents who don't appear to have any access to garaging because they're next to these open spaces. So as already mentioned, there's a risk that a lot of parking will be on the local roads and people will walk through to their homes, which would be a real problem. This is the aerial photo.
Dr. Goldsmith, you'll need to use your cursor.
Yes, of course. Yep. Is it working? Doesn't show up on there.
No, no, it's all right.
I use the thing here. So I just want to focus particularly on the stormwater channels. This is an aerial photograph which I have had a lot of fun trawling through council documents and learning about the GIS viewer. And so this aerial photo can be overlaid with with the aerial photograph taken very recently, showing in rather greater detail the local industrial and commercial zones, Bunnings down here, and what are largely, I think, auto dismantlers in this area here. And these are the stormwater channels shown on the plan. They drain round this way in a southerly direction, then westerly, and then they come round to the big drains along the rail track. I think I've gone backwards. I want to just look at in particular, the connections with Hastings Place here and Quentin Drive, and the one which is going to be the access to the rail trail from Innes Common. This area is the floodplain here. Now, the plan is for a very sensitive this, for a roughly 10-acre or 4-hectare development. The problem is that there's a floodplain occupying roughly, I don't know, 30% or so of this, adjacent to these industrial areas to the west. And I'm worried about the potential for leachage of heavy metals and other contaminants such as lead into this area, which is a flood hazard. And you've noticed that Hastings Place at the top there is a very severe flood risk area, as are the drains to the west in heavy blue. So we had a really wet winter 2 winters ago. We had more than 150% of the usual rainfall, so we had nearly a metre of rain, another foot of rain, in fact, over the historical average. And the result of that was that we had considerable flooding locally around Innes Common, such that ductlings could be raised. And the drains to the west of the Innes Common and along the rail trail, which are shown here, on this aerial photo, became open ponds, basically. They didn't drain away at all. There was no movement of water, and it became a real health hazard for people using the bike path, particularly young children, and for mosquitoes the following summer. There's also an issue with lighting, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, just up here, where the walkway goes through from the proposed development through Gilbass Avenue to Innes Common there, where it's the new bike path, which would be part of the access arrangements. And that's basically what we've got. We've got this huge culvert. Oh, goodness sake.
Technology.
Don't you love it? The bike path along the rail trail has a long drain alongside of it, and they've built huge culverts, but I've never seen any water flowing through them. It can't drain through those. There's no movement. They just sit as open ponds and need to be cleared. And the photographs show the problems here is that we've got these very steep, deep drains which are blocked, that they don't function at all. The one next to Hastings Place is actually right next to the most severe flood area on the map, so that access through that would be compromised by flooding anyway if they had to escape because of a natural disaster of some sort. Quentin Drive one does have water flowing through it, and it is going in a westerly direction. This bottom photograph here shows water flowing in a westerly direction underneath the drive that goes into Quentin Place, and as you can see, it's a very steep and dangerous environment for children. There's no fencing on any of these apart from some temporary fencing around the Quentin Drive. And the other issue is the lighting. If you look at the top picture on the right, you can see that there is a walkway through to Innes Common, but at night, and the picture is slightly moved over to show the street lamp, it's completely dark. You can walk down there. There's a bollard at the end which you can walk into very easily in the dark, as I've done on occasion. And so really the lighting needs to be addressed, the health and well-being of people needs to be addressed, the potential toxicity of some of the land from leachate from the industrial area needs to be addressed. And how can you put 300 people on what's essentially a part of a 10-acre block without needing much more open space, communal gardens, play areas such as already been addressed? To me, if it's going to be done, and I suspect it should be done because the land needs to be used, but it needs to be done properly with attention to the health and well-being of all the people who are likely to live there, including children with chronic health problems, adults with disabilities, mental health problems, and appropriate access within that area to facilities that promote well-being.
Thank you. Luke, how far does our jurisdiction go as to how far outside of the parameters of the subdivision can your private development agreements extend, as far as the different concerns Dr. Goldsmith's had with lighting and alleyways off the subdivision and drainage and different issues that he's touched on?
It's a contractual process between council and the developer. So what we've proposed here for a private development agreement is no different to any other PDA arrangement that we've put before council in relation to an SHA, the purpose of which is to secure the necessary arrangements to fund the infrastructure that's necessary to support the development. The ability to engage with the residents that have turned up today is one that we've heard from the applicant that they would engage with them on specific design matters as a part of developing the qualifying development. So if you think there's two very different components. One is a conversation with council about funding. So what infrastructure is needed to support the development, whether it be stormwater infrastructure, whether it be an upgrade to roads or paths or lighting arrangements, things that are needed but which we're not going to fund, which they're going to fund, which is the matter between us and the landowner. The separate matters about the design and the layout and the configuration of the actual project itself are matters that I've heard today from Mr Gardner and his representatives that they are committed to engage with the community around those aspects, and so that's a non-statutory process. That's something that they would do not just with Tangata Whenua but with the other landowners that they would talk to prior to the lodgement of any QD, and then when it's actually lodged, the council staff in the planning guidance unit can also have the ability to formally involve landowners who directly adjoin the site. So I want to be very clear that the PDA is a separate commercial matter between the council and the developer around the infrastructure that's needed to support the project, and that's what we do all the time, and it's one that we don't involve third parties unless there's a particular effect resulting from the infrastructure arrangements coming out of that. In this instance, it's hard for me to see that occurring, but there's a separate engagement piece that we've heard a commitment today from the developer that they would work with the community and engage them. In particular, Mana Whenua, we've got a proposal here of amending one of the recommendations, which we'll table when we come up to speak to the report. But that's how I see the distinction between those two separate items.
Happy to take any questions. There are no questions, so thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much.
So if we can take a 10-minute break for a cup of tea, we'll come back at 10 to 3, please. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.